Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most profound challenges in medicine, dementia. We're going to peel back the layers step by step to get a really clear picture of what's happening inside a brain under siege. So, let's start with the big question, the one that really guides all the research. How does a healthy, functioning brain, the very thing that makes us who we are, start to lose its way? This is the mystery we're going to try and unravel piece by piece. To get there, we've got a roadmap. We'll start by defining the challenge, the big picture. Then we'll dig into our internal genetic blueprint and see how that connects with triggers from the outside world. From there, we'll zoom right in to see how the damage is actually done. And finally, we'll look at how it all gets locked into a destructive, vicious cycle. We need to understand exactly what we're talking about and get a sense of just how widespread this condition really is. Okay, the first crucial thing to get your head around is that dementia isn't one single disease. It's really an umbrella term for a whole group of disorders. But what they all have in common is this progressive decline in thinking, in memory, and in the ability to just go about daily life. Understanding this distinction is absolutely key. This chart really puts the scale of it all into perspective, doesn't it? Alzheimer's disease is clearly the most dominant form. It accounts for the lion's share of all cases. But, and this is so important, look at that other big slice. That's made up of other types, like vascular dementia, Lewy body, and frontotemporal dementia. They make up a huge piece of the puzzle, and each one works a little differently. So now that we have the lay of the land, let's start looking for clues inside the body. We're going to dig into the genetic blueprint to see what role our DNA plays in setting the stage for dementia. Now, this slide is super important because it shows two very different ways genetics can play a role in Alzheimer's. On one hand, you have the very rare early onset kind. Think of it like a specific typo in the genetic code that basically guarantees the overproduction of a toxic protein. But then, on the other hand, you have the much more common late onset form. Now, this isn't about a single gene that seals your fate. It's about genetic susceptibility. Genes like ApoE4 don't guarantee anything, but they might make it a bit harder for the brain's cleanup crew to do its job and manage inflammation. And this theme of genetic influence pops up in other dementias too. Different genes are involved in frontotemporal dementia and Lewy body dementia, and they're often linked to the specific proteins that go rogue in those diseases, like tau or alpha-synuclein. You can see the common thread, right? Genetics can disrupt the brain's quality control system for its proteins. So, if genetics are the blueprint, our next set of clues involves how the world interacts with that blueprint. Let's explore those triggers from the outside, all the environmental and biological factors that can essentially pull the trigger on a genetic predisposition.
Aging is the single biggest risk factor, but it's definitely not alone. Things like high blood pressure, diabetes, head injuries, and even chronic stress all play a part. Now here's the wild part. These outside factors can actually change how our genes are expressed. It's a process called epigenetics. Think of it like someone adding sticky notes to your genetic blueprint that tells certain genes to work more or less. That's how these factors can amplify any underlying vulnerabilities you might have.
And here's a totally fascinating emerging area of research, the gut-brain connection. It turns out that when the trillions of microbes in our gut, and even in our mouth, get out of balance, it can create this chronic, low-grade inflammation all through the body. And this inflammation can actually sneak past the brain's protective barrier and act as a powerful accelerator for damage. Another critical trigger is the oxygen problem. When the brain doesn't get enough oxygen, a state called hypoxia, it triggers a major stress response. Conditions like sleep apnea are a perfect example of this. The problem is that stress response has a dangerous side effect. It actually ramps up the production of toxic proteins like amyloid and fuels even more inflammation. In this next section, we're going to see exactly how these factors combine to cause real physical damage inside the brain. This table gives us a great snapshot of the different signatures of damage. For Alzheimer's, it's the classic amyloid plaques and tau tangles. In Lewy body dementia, it's these clumps of a protein called alpha-synuclein. In vascular dementia, the damage is coming from a lack of blood flow. So you see, each type has its own primary culprit, its own distinct way of causing disruption. But despite all those differences, there is one factor that unites and amplifies every single one of them: neuroinflammation. The brain's immune cells, the glia, are supposed to be the protectors, but when they're constantly activated by these protein clumps or by damage, they switch from helping to harming. they start releasing toxic chemicals that just accelerate the damage, no matter which type of dementia it is. This brings us to the final and most critical piece of our investigation, how all these elements lock together. We're about to see how the brain's own defenses are tragically turned against itself, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of destruction. Let's just walk through this. It starts with those misfolded proteins clumping up. Then, the brain's immune cells activate to fight what they see as a threat. But the threat doesn't go away, so the inflammation becomes chronic and toxic. This toxic environment damages brain cells and their connections, which causes even more proteins to misfold and clump together. And just like that, the cycle restarts. Only this time, it's stronger. This quote just captures the heart of the tragedy perfectly. The very systems designed to protect the brain, the immune response, the reaction to low oxygen, they get hijacked. They get twisted into the very engines that drive the disease's progression. And that leaves us with a final, forward-looking question. This detailed understanding isn't just academic. By pinpointing every single step in these destructive cycles, from the genetics to the inflammation to the protein aggregation, we can identify new targets, new strategies. The real question becomes, how can we intervene to break the loop? And that is the critical question that drives the science forward.